How's it going, guys? Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Phil Talk Sports Podcast. Joining me for today's episode, the voice of the Daytona Tortugas on a rare day off during the week, Mr. Justin Rocke. How you doing, man? Thanks for doing this.
Doing well, man. Enjoying the All-Star break and getting ready for Friday night back at home to start, really the final push of the season.
Yeah, we're down to about, I think, this weekend and like true homestands left. So if you haven't been out to the Jack yet this year, definitely get out there. So I want to start with, you're home relaxing for this week. I follow the tweets for the games, obviously, even when I'm not working on the road. And you had quite an experience in Tampa last week. I don't think a single game when it's normal time there wasn't a game that wasn't affected by weather at some level or another last week. So can you take us through that?
Yeah, well, luckily Tuesday was, I think, the only day where that was not a factor. Where we started on time and finished as normal, but every day after that was a little bit of chaos. Wednesday, we had a lengthy delay that was, 2.5 hours long. And I didn't know until that day that there's a little known minor league baseball rule that says if a game starts at 9 o'clock local time or later, that means it can only be a 7 inning scheduled game. So a 6:30 game got started at 9:01 Eastern time, and thus it was a 7 inning game instead of a 9 inning game, which no one was complaining about at that point. And then you had Thursday, we started the game, and after about 2 2/3 innings, both teams were waved off the field due to lightning. And next thing you knew, it was another lengthy delay, and the game was suspended. Friday, supposed to play a doubleheader, so completed the game from Thursday, had a delay at the start of that. Then after that, tried finishing a 7 inning game in itself, and it lasted only 5 innings before the game had to be called due to lightning and whatever weather. Saturday had about a two hour or so delay before it was called on Saturday, and then Sunday got through 1 7 inning game and about almost 4 innings in game two before lightning came and then a torrential downpour came. And so that game is not going to be picked up again until September 6th in Daytona. So it'll be a 5:30 start on a Tuesday in Daytona at the very end of the season to make up for this. As manager Gookie Dawkins told me on Saturday night, he had never seen a week like that in his entire baseball career. From playing days to coaching days to managing days, never had a week weather-wise quite like that in Tampa.
Yeah, I can't imagine that that's something that they deal with very often. And so when you have these delays, like you're on the air the whole time. Like you very rarely are gonna just like, all right, we'll come back when the game's about to start. You're kind of just at no man's land for the most part. And like I've done this show for 3 years, and I can count on one hand the shows I've done by myself. I always have a guest or just someone to bounce off of. And even the ones I do by myself, they never go more than like 30, 35 minutes. So to do 2.5 hours by yourself is something I can't fathom. So, that's amazingly impressive, I think. But, like, you must hit a point where you're just like, are you just reading scores of other games or just talking about whatever comes to your mind? Like, how does that work?
I mean, usually if the game hasn't started yet, I tend not to start the broadcast to try and prevent sort of those things because at some point you do kind of run out of things on your own. But if the
Mhm.
game has already started and we hit a delay, we've had some lengthy delays mid-game during the course of the year. What I'll usually do is try and do like a little recap at the start of the delay, take people through what has happened in the game so far, scoring wise, who might be the winning pitcher, losing pitcher if the game was called at a given moment, and then sort of do like a mini post game show as if it was, like the game had gone final, just in case the game does get called or whatever, to sort of like, say we did have some sort of a recap and do the out of town scoreboard and preview sort of what's to come in the days ahead, whether it be on the road or at home, wherever you may be. And then sometimes if it extends longer than that, I will have a log in my computer of all our commercials, and then in the middle I'll have an interview that we conducted either earlier in the series, earlier in the year, just to eat up some time, not only to give myself a breather on air, but to make sure there's something constantly going over the airwaves, that to let people know that, there is still an attempt to keep the game going at that point, but also give me an opportunity. If I'm on air, I don't have the opportunity to sort of ask questions and figure out, hey, what's going on?
Right.
Do we have a chance to play this game? If we do, what time are we looking at to maybe restart this game? Um, and all those things in between. So, not only is that strategic to give me a breather, but it also to help accentuate the broadcast, because usually before I start going through the commercials and replaying a different interview, I'll come back and sort of say what's going on, what's it looking like at the ballpark, and any other information I might have gathered in that meantime.
You tend to start most broadcasts with like an interview of maybe one of our players or coaches, in some rare cases an opponent, maybe it's a local guy or something. We'll talk about another local guy here in a little bit. What's your process like to pick, like, is it just who's available sometimes, or oh, I'd like to speak to that person because of this significant detail, or what's your like thought process to figure out who to interview at what time?
Usually, if there's something that, happened currently, something that's, newsworthy, a guy at a, career high game, or is coming off, a really good outing, then I might be more inclined to lean one way or the other. But usually at a certain point during the season, I just want to try and get as many guys as humanly possible on the pregame show, regardless of how well or poorly they're performing, just because one, it may mean something to their family just to have that in their, in their log of, their son or their, their nephew or whomever, being interviewed in a professional setting, but also just to learn more about these guys. You never know who's going to have a big game and who's going to, turn a corner at a certain point. Um, and everyone's got an interesting story to tell. Michael Troutwine, who was, a 13th round pick of the Reds last year at Northwestern, not a guy on any prospect lists, but his grandfather played pro ball, his dad played pro ball. He's a pro ball player. So it's interesting, you know, hearing what it's been like for him to, share those stories with his family, and, to be able to have that family lineage. Kevin Abel, interviewed last week, Oregon State guy, battled through injuries and has a bunch of his college teammates that he won the College World Series with. They're still playing pro ball that he keeps in touch with. So everyone's got an interesting story to tell, I feel like. And there's always some sort of, unique angle that each player can tell that, someone else may not be able to know by not having the interview, or just keeps it different, gives them the opportunity to tell their story too.
Do you ever find, like, even at our level, you kind of have guys that are either already stars or you can kind of see they're going on that trajectory? Do you find that maybe the guys that aren't on that same trajectory can be a little bit more fun to interview sometimes? Maybe they appreciate it a little more. They don't get the microphone in their faces often, but like I've noticed that just from some certain other things. Sometimes the more entertaining interviews to listen to are maybe not the superstars on teams of any level.
Yeah, to a certain degree, there are some instances like that. I think a lot of times the upper level prospects and the more highly regarded guys are a little more coached in terms of how to conduct themselves and how to answer questions in interview settings. Not to say that they're not personable, and not to say that they're not giving, good insight and things like that, but they might, have their guard up a little bit more than somebody else who's, not a superstar, not someone who's made a name for themselves yet. Not to say that they won't become a prospect down the road. I think that's part of the fun of working on the lower levels, is guys haven't quite, made a name for themselves yet, outside of a select few guys. Um, so yeah, absolutely. That's, a huge, huge part of it. And I think, some of my best interviews and some of the more, insightful interviews at times have been the guys that aren't the top flight prospects. I mean, Michael Troutwine this year. I remember interviews with Wes Robertson and Garrett Wolforth last year who haven't been on top prospect lists, but there's a story. I mean, even a guy like Joe DeLuca, who was cut by the Reds earlier this year, played Daytona. I had a 13-minute interview with him talking about his experience from independent ball to the pandemic and all these different things. Just was a super unique story. And just because he's not a top prospect doesn't mean it's not something that baseball fans and Tortuga fans won't find interesting.
Yeah, I find that happens sometimes. The lower on the totem pole, sometimes the better the interview. You mentioned, that one being during the pandemic. The last time I had you on the show, it was like peak pandemic. You were still up north, I believe, and we were
Yeah.
having wishful thinking for a Tortuga season that ultimately didn't happen. 2020 was scrapped. We had our 2021 season that I've considered like survival mode. We like to push the envelope a little bit, do things a little fun. Last year was more about getting through it, and I think this year is more back on as normal as things are going to be nowadays, and we're getting back to our fun ways and stuff. Do you feel that after all that has happened, that maybe people are a little more I don't know that they appreciate it more, but I know like that amount of time of not having sports and everything, like I think we're still on the high of having everything back to some extent.
Yeah, I think that that's certainly part of it. And the other aspect of it, particularly in the Tortugas case, is, there was a period of time where you wondered if there was ever going to be another Tortugas game during the middle of that pandemic. Whether, the last 143 some odd games of Tortugas baseball was going to be canceled due to the end of the 2019 season being erased due to Hurricane Dorian, and then of course, 2020 pandemic with the Tortugas on that minor league chopping block. So I think not only has the absence of live sports and the absence of sports with a crowd during the pandemic has sort of buoyed the enthusiasm, but also the appreciation that there was a chance that um, this wasn't going to be a thing anymore. So to come out and continue to support the team and show the Reds and show Major League Baseball that keeping Daytona as part of the minor league chain was not only the right decision, but a decision that's going to help baseball going forward.
And luckily, I don't think that's a conversation we're gonna have to worry about at least anytime soon now. So that kind of takes that weight off. I think two of the highlights too going into this year. Funny enough, they happened in the same week. I think Fourth of July night for us was awesome. I think 2021 we didn't have a home game on Fourth of July. We did some sort of Fourth of July festivity like the weekend before or after, whatever that might have been. But that was awesome. That was what I thought was going to be the biggest crowd of the year. And then around Tuesday or Wednesday, I got a text from you saying, "Hey, are you working Friday? Do we have our A team production staff on Friday?" And we did, luckily. Shout out to Josh and Richard. And you said, "I can't tell you why yet, but you guys need to be there." And then the Mets spilled the beans that we had a local legend, Jacob DeGrom, was a four-time All-Star, two-time Cy Young winner. Everything that you as a pitcher can accomplish outside of a World Series ring, but that's more of being on the Mets than how good or bad this particular player is. I don't know about you. The only other major league player that I've seen in my time working in Daytona was Scooter Gennett a few years ago. I don't know if you had any other situations like this, maybe on the road or whatever, but this was big time. I think it's an equal level of who it was because of what a big star DeGrom is, and that he's from the area. I think that was almost people were as excited about that as anything else.
Yeah, I think that was a huge part of it with DeGrom, was the whole local angle. I think that was a huge part of the reason why he wanted to make his next rehab start on the road in Daytona. When you're a person of DeGrom's stature, they sort of leave it up to you. Like, hey, where do you feel comfortable pitching? Do you want to go to place X, Y, Z, or whatever? And he's from DeLand. He still lives in DeLand during the off season. So this was a chance to come home for him. And I think it really meant, based on some of the comments he's made after the fact, particularly in the post-game presser he held after he started that day, was, he really appreciated, the local support and, the community coming out to support him and giving him that moment. He seemed to really appreciate, which is awesome. You don't always see that a lot of times. I've seen a few rehabbers in my time. 2019 was cool. I remember Josh Harrison came to Jackie Robinson Ballpark with Lakeland because he was actually a former Daytona Cub.
Hmm.
And he was actually playing at Jackie Robinson Ballpark in the home clubhouse when he found out he got traded from the Cubs to, I think it was the Pirates at that time.
Mm.
But him, I remember seeing a couple other guys, in my time with the Tennessee Smokies, Jorge Soler, Miguel Montero, um, Matt Caesar. We had for a period of time. My first year in Brevard County, we had some lower level rehabbers, but I remember Clearwater sending Cliff Lee to Space Coast Stadium, and he threw, I think, like 2.5 innings, and and then a guy hit a home run for Clearwater in the top half of an inning, and the ball was so wind aided because a storm was brewing that as soon as he hit home plate, they were like, "Yeah, everybody get off the field."
Wow.
And sure enough, like it does in Florida, the heavens opened up, and that was the end of the Cliff Lee rehab start. But in terms of fanfare and turnout and media turnout, I never quite had one like that with DeGrom a couple of Fridays ago. And if Jim Jaworski, the Tortugas GM, Adam McDonald, the voice of the St. Lucie Mets, their media relations man, and St. Lucie's GM Traer Van Allen coordinated what a perfect day would be like for that to go for DeGrom in terms of a security, fan, and business standpoint. It really could not have gone any better than what could have been scripted. So shout out to everyone from security to the fans behaving to the media following directions to our staff being unbelievably great that day. It was awesome to see the community come out and show support, and was even better because our guys did extremely well against DeGrom. They held their own against him, and it was really a great game going down to the final out that day. Unfortunately, Daytona lost, but hard to complain when you had a great rally in the ninth inning, and was just a fun day at the ballpark.
Yeah, I've had people tell me that we're either there or just try to follow everything. You would think that we've had the whole season to prepare for this, when in reality we had like 48 hours notice. So I agree. I think it was
Yeah.
pulled off really well. You mentioned the game itself being close. You mentioned the home run off Cliff Lee. Let's talk about the home run that wasn't here. That DeGrom, I think in your words, was millimeters away from, was it Austin Callahan
Yep.
nearly hitting a home run off, and you tweeted that out live that it was millimeters away from going over. And then later we were able to post a video, and there was several comments of, "Yo, you weren't kidding. That was that close." And like the double, the stand up double that it ended up being is still commendable. But like what a legend that would be to get a home run off of DeGrom like that, if that would have gone that way.
Yeah, no, it would have been an incredible moment. I was, even though it was a double, I was still nearly falling out of my booth as that play was developing. And I was talking with Adam McDonald, the voice of the Mets, about that. What would you be, frustrated and disappointed that you were that close
Yeah.
to a home run and not come away with one. But he was so, you watch the video and you see Rich zoom in on Austin after he hits the double, and Warren Saunders, the second baseman of the Mets, puts his glove in front of his face and whispers or says something into Callahan's ear, and Callahan just couldn't stop smiling the rest of the way. The rest of the way, just completely cheesing the rest of the footage. And that was the, I think, the right, the mindset. Like, he put as good a swing on a ball as anyone could have ever hoped for at that level against DeGrom, especially when you consider that nobody had gotten a hit off him in the last 2 years of rehab starts in this league.
Right.
So for that to be the first one and to come that close to getting it out, I think it was still about 400 plus feet on that ball that he hit. it was just a cool moment, and only thing that would have made it better if he came around and scored a batter or two later.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned you could see the moment of I'm going to play this off like it's any other hit, and that lasted about 30 seconds. And again, shout out to Rich for really capturing this perfectly. Capturing the ball, nearly going over, going back to Callahan. Everything was perfect about the shot that we had. We make a lot happen with one camera. I think that deserves to be said sometimes. And you could
Absolutely.
tell I'm just going to play this off like it's any other double, and that did not work out. And, he pitched 3 innings, and we got 3 hits off him. And there was some discussion in the club, not the club, sorry, the press box before the game from a certain publication here locally that maybe doesn't cover the team as much as he should these days, mentioning, I don't know if you were in the room for this, but like he mentioned the Tortugas were going to have trouble just making contact with DeGrom, and to get 3 hits in 3 innings, I think is more than commendable.
More than commendable, and really all of them were pretty well stung. Jack Rogers hit a line drive, had to be triple digits exit velocity single in a right field off him. Stephen Layton probably didn't crush the ball as well as the other two guys did, but still picked up a base hit. Rogers went first to third on that play. Unfortunately, DeGrom also throws 90+ mile an hour sliders, so he was able to get out of jams both times. But most importantly, I think over those 3 innings was the fact that they had professional at bats against him. Yeah, there are times where DeGrom overpowered them because he's Jacob DeGrom and has certain, skill sets and things in his arsenal that the average pitcher does not, especially at this level. But when you're a bunch of single A guys playing against one of the best pitchers of his generation on short notice, it's easy to be overwhelmed. And I give a lot of credit to a guy who had no hits and actually struck out. I think he saw the most sliders out of anybody on the team, Jamal O'Gwyn, who apparently in the dugout before the game in the locker room was like, hey, we got to be positive, man. Like, if we
Yeah,
go in there thinking we've got no chance, we're really going to have no chance against them.
yeah.
And so I think it's that positive attitude that emanated from the clubhouse pregame that helped, predicate some really good at bats and ultimately some base hits. And, you loved seeing the guys go out there and hold their own against, a really, really good pitcher, even if they didn't come away with base hits.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that they're going to remember for their career, however far their career does go. Where does that whole weekend, that whole evening line up for games that you've called? I mean, for as long as I've known you, the other thing I would maybe put up with it is last year you were able to call a collective no hitter. I imagine that would be up there as well. Where does this rank in your broadcast career?
I mean, it's up there. It was special between just the press around it and the coverage around it. But I think even more so just from the reaction from friends, family, coworkers, so excited to tune in and listen to hear my voice call even just 3 innings of a Jacob DeGrom start at any level, and being able to send some stuff along to places, and sending highlights to WFAN in New York City. I have no idea if it ever made it on the air,
Sure.
but I got an email back saying like, "Hey, these are awesome. Like, we're going to put these in the system." Whether it was aired, I have no idea.
Right.
But the fact that that was the reaction, and that was something that might have happened is incredible. I've had some great opportunities, like you mentioned, the no-hitter last year, um, working for the Tennessee Smokies Cubs affiliate the year they won the World Series in 2016, while being a Penn State student, getting to do games at Yankee Stadium and the Barclays Center, and working at MetLife Stadium, and then working for Army, getting to do a game for Madison Square Garden. So I've gotten to do a lot of really cool things in my young career, but that was definitely up there.
I actually want to mention that no hitter one more time because I remember wanting to have a show with you back then, and circumstances happened and we didn't get to that. So it was a collective no hitter, and I think there's two sides to what is more impressive, whether a single person going wire to wire with a no hitter, a perfect game, or the collection of people. And I stand to argue that a collective no hitter might be a little more impressive because other than the stamina needed to go wire to wire, it's not one guy in the zone, it's three, four, sometimes five guys in the zone for a night. So like obviously both are impressive, but do you think one is maybe a little more than the other?
I think they're both pretty impressive. I mean, obviously, I think sort of the one person no hitter or perfect game is going to be more celebrated and recognized as special, especially now
Yeah.
that complete games and things like that become so rare. And I think that's, if you're going to see a no hitter in Daytona Beach, or really in most minor league cities these days, it's going to be a combined no hitter. Very rarely are you going to see a guy go a full nine. The odds are, if you're going to see a no hitter thrown by one guy, it's going to be like what happened in Tampa this year with a guy that, by the way, we were talking about in Tampa over the weekend. Yorlin Calderon threw a 7 inning no hitter in his Tampa debut and was immediately sent back down to the Florida Complex
Oh
League,
my
to
god.
which he has not returned. Which I was like, "Why? Guy threw a no hitter. Guy
Yeah, right?
went out there and threw a no, and didn't get an opportunity to have a second start in the league yet. But my guess is he'll probably be in Tampa by the time they come to the Jack in September. But yeah, but I think that's a great point. I think sometimes the combined no hitters are a little overlooked because of the fact that it's not the one guy, and there's certain stigmas around it. But exactly that, and why I would like to see more pitchers go deep into games is, the more arms you use, the percentage chance that everyone is going to be on their game and have their best stuff, um, you know, is very unlikely. So the ability for that to happen in the no hitter, and I think the biggest part of that no hitter, and you might remember this too, was Ricky Karcher came on in that game through one pitch and left with an injury.
Oh
So the
wow.
guy who threw a scoreless eighth inning was not expecting to pitch that day. Nick Hansen came on and saved the day. He walked a couple of guys. There were a bunch of walks in that game. But that aspect of it too, when you got a guy who wasn't even expecting to pitch that day, have to come on in a no hitter, 1 run game too. I might add, it was a 1-0 game, and not only keep the no hitter intact, but keep the lead intact. Um, yeah, I think what you said about combined no hitters is 100% on the money.
I have a strange no hitter story to tell you. When I was working at Daytona State baseball, it was a double header day, so you got 7 inning games, and junior college still has like the mercy rule. And long story short, I forget the team that Daytona State was playing, but the pitcher got a no hitter in what ended up being a 5 inning game because of the run rule. So it's a no hitter, congrats, but 5 innings, I'm not to take it away from anybody, but definitely a unique one, I would say.
Yeah, definitely had one like that. Actually, my first year ever being a broadcaster for a team in the Cape Cod League, 2012 with the Bourne Braves. Jeff Thompson, I was a pitcher from Louisville, pitched in the Tiger system for a number of years. Might still be an indie ball somewhere. But he was throwing a no hitter, and the game ended up being put in a rain delay, and ultimately determined that we couldn't continue. So I still have the photo on my phone of the scoreboard in right center field at Doran Park in Bourne, Mass. Um, Showing that he threw a no hitter against, I think it was the Harwich Mariners, because when it was called, he was throwing a no hitter. It was an official game. It still counted, but it wasn't the on field dog pile, the ceremonious celebration that you're used to.
Yeah, I'd hope that when the game went final, they at least dogpiled him in the locker room or something, maybe just to give him a little bit of celebration. Let's
Absolutely.
talk.
At the very least, we got the photo.
Yeah, exactly. There's proof at least. Let's talk about. I used to call it the All Star Weekend. It's not really a weekend anymore. Let's call it the All Star Break. We had the Home Run Derby. I want to start there just for a minute. Juan Soto won, which not that was a huge surprise. The biggest surprise was maybe Pujols going as far as he did. But a lot of people weren't really satisfied with the timer mechanism. They preferred I think it's the 10 out system instead, because there was a couple like, oh, did that ball go over before the timer and everything? Do you just, we'll talk more about the All-Star game itself, but do you think the home run derby, it was entertaining enough to watch, but like, do you think they need to tweak that a little bit?
Honestly, I love the timer system. I remember seeing it for the first time actually in the Florida State League, my first year in pro ball in 2014 down in Bradenton. And that was back when they were still using the 10 out system in Major League Baseball. And I was like, why aren't they doing this? This is way more fun. It's more like batting practice. Guys get into a rhythm. So I think that's still the right way. I think, and this is something I've talked with some TV people about, I think the presentation aspect of it from ESPN could be a little bit better.
Yeah.
The split screen stuff I think hurts a lot of it.
Hmm.
Being able to follow the baseball, from half a screen, especially with the quickness of it. So that I think there's something they need to figure out with how they can present it in a better way, because I think that's the best way. I The phrase I've used is Josh Hamilton in 2008 ruined the 10 out home run derby because he was so good at it.
Hmm.
Uh, and sometimes, you just have bad batting practice pitchers and guys taking pitch after pitch after pitch and nothing's happening. And you've watched a half hour of one guy hitting, and the guy hit 3 home runs and took 50 pitches. So give me the timer, give me the time limit. But there has to be a better way that they can display the raw power while also keeping the clock.
I agree with you about the presentation. Obviously, like camera angles and shots are something I'm going to pick up on pretty quickly. And it was almost like the split screen. I agree with your statement on it, but it's one of those like, all right, that didn't work, but like, what else can you do? And obviously, they were gonna play with some things and figure it out. But I think for the most part, people enjoyed themselves. I think if you were there, people had a blast because you didn't deal with what we dealt with at home. The All Star game itself, I think, went on great. A little low scoring for an All Star game. Tend to have a little more flair than that, but I think that went well. Even with the World Series home field advantage no longer being at stake, I still think Major League Baseball's All Star game is probably the best in the genre.
I'm personally partial to the basketball All-Star game. I know some people like to knock the defense on it,
Hmm.
but I've always felt that's a little more replicative, just because there are so many guys. I mean, I think there's like 80 players that ended up being named All-Star teams this year in baseball because guys either couldn't play because they were injured,
Yeah.
or certain pitchers weren't eligible to play because they threw on Sunday, which I think takes a little bit away from it in that sense. If 10% of the league is making the All-Star game, it's a little eh. But we talk about critical of presentation with the home run derby. I think, as critical as that can be, I think the presentation for the All-Star game itself was unbelievably great
Yeah.
yesterday, with all the different players mic'd up, and all the different, ways it was mic'd up. You had Nestor Cortez and Jose Trevino, battery mic'd up one inning. You had Giancarlo Stanton and Aaron Judge one inning, Julio Rodriguez. You had Alek Manoah for the Blue Jays taking, pitch suggestions from the booth, and a bunch of different guys. Liam Hendricks, trying to get Julio Rodriguez
Hmm.
not to throw the ball into the crowd so he could save it for his own personal collection. Little things like that, getting to really get to maybe know these players a little more outside of just who they are as, stats and figures and chess pieces, as they're sometimes viewed as, was unbelievably fantastic. And I love that it's not determining home field advantage in the All-Star game. I don't think, you know, a dude playing for a team that's going to end up winning 60 games should be determining who should be playing at home in the World Series, the Yankees or the Dodgers. Um, so I love that it's just an exhibition game. Let it be the story of baseball. We can argue about, whether or not the uniforms were good, or whether or not we should bring back the old school, just wear your normal jerseys.
I think yeah.
Um,
I think at
but
the very
I,
least they
I- I'd
should.
lean I'd lean towards that as well.
Hmm.
But I'll tell you what, at least what they wore last night was a hell of a lot better than what was worn the year prior, when I think it was like the American League looked like blueberries. They looked
Yeah.
like what was it? Was it Veruca or whoever in Willy Wonka that turned into the giant
Yeah.
blueberry? Brian would know this well.
Right. I think at the very least they should wear their regular on-field caps. Like if they're gonna wear, black and white All-Star jerseys or whatever, at least distinguished by wearing their true, fielders caps. I would think at least. We're gonna take a quick break here, guys, and I'm gonna wrap it up with Justin. He asked him some questions about his Yankees, so stick around. Okay, so I lied. I had one quick question before we get to the Yankee stuff. I think this is an. I'm not gonna pretend that I follow this super closely, but to my knowledge, this is the first time that the MLB Draft is the same weekend as all this All Star festivities, and I feel like it kind of got lost in the shuffle, and that seems to be the consensus to most baseball fans these days. You go on MLB.com, and all the stories are, of course, everything that went on with the home run derby and the AllStar game, even the celebrity softball game, which is always a joy to watch. But do you think the draft itself got a little lost in the shuffle due to it being placed over this All-Star break?
Actually, it was the second year that
Okay.
they've done this, and honestly, the part of the reason why they chose to do this was trying to create more attention for the draft, have it be a part, in some senses, of All Star Weekend. They held it out in Los Angeles, unlike last year. You know, it was a more public event. You know, they tried making a little bit more like the NBA and NFL drafts, you know, bringing guys up and interviewing them and giving them a jersey and all that kind of stuff. They've tried doing that for a couple of years, but this is probably the biggest production they'd ever put together. Personally, I would have liked for them to put the All-Star Futures game on Sunday night
Yeah.
instead of the MLB draft. I think that would have been, better placement there. But I totally get it. I know a lot of people in the baseball industry are frustrated by the draft being pushed to where it is now, in the sense that there's just a lot of stuff in a short period of time, and requires a lot of manpower and human power to be able to, successfully orchestrate the draft and all these different things that are going on, with the trade deadline going on as well, coming up in the next couple of weeks. So it's a lot of stuff in a short period of time. And I think that's where a lot of the frustration stems from. But I mean, in terms of an attention standpoint, I think, they moved it to this time in order to try and drum up some more interest and more eyeballs on it than maybe when it had been in mid-June in
Hmm.
years past, where it's also competing with, midweek baseball games also.
Yeah, I mean, I respect the thought of like, let's just make this whole 6, 7 day stretch about baseball and put everything in there and make it seem a little more important. I don't know if they succeeded in the way they did it, so maybe it just is going to take some tweaking. But I think you raised some interesting points on when they did it, and I did appreciate the kind of in-house thing going on. Like you could be at All-Star Weekend and literally go over to this band shell area and see these players getting drafted. So I think if you're there, it was a really great experience. If you maybe follow college baseball or something, and I think it's just another avenue that you could go in. Um, so maybe it'll just take some tweaking, like you mentioned. It's only the second year they've done this, so maybe they'll work out the kinks. So one of the All Star players from your Yankees that was here over the weekend was Aaron Judge. He's been having a great year so far, 33 home runs at the break, and there's been a lot of discussion on how much longer he'll be a Yankee. Obviously, you being a Yankee fan and maybe being a little more plugged in than I am, how confident are you that a deal gets done, or do you think we see him in another uniform before long?
I mean, I would not be surprised to see him somewhere else at the start of next year. It's hard to call myself really a Yankee fan, quote unquote, these days. A large part, just you don't get a chance to watch.
Sure, yeah.
You do growing up. I'm watching Tortugas games, not Yankee games anymore. So the fandom definitely isn't quite as strong as it once was, and I would definitely probably consider myself more of a Reds fan now than a Yankees fan.
Hmm.
But in terms of the Judge stuff, though, particularly, I would not be surprised though if he's elsewhere. Honestly, it wouldn't shock me if sometime next year that they'll have traded for Juan Soto and Judge will be playing elsewhere. Um, that's sort of the impression I've gotten at this point. One of those, if he was going to stay, they'd have inked him to a deal at this point.
Yeah.
And it just feels like that's just sort of the trend right now in baseball, where these guys just aren't staying with one team long term anymore. I mean, you saw with Freddie Freeman this offseason with the Braves going to the Dodgers. You saw with Mookie Betts a couple of years ago with the Red Sox going to the Dodgers. You've heard it even with the Red Sox this year with guys like Xander Bogaerts and Rafael Devers. So it feels like this is the trend we're going towards. It stinks that Juan Soto isn't going to be a national long term, but it would not shock me if Aaron Judge sporting a beard somewhere on opening day next season.
It is such a unique story, though, right, with Judge, because the Yankees are known for that guy's really good. We have the money to go get that guy. We go get that guy. There's not a lot of quote unquote homegrown Yankee players, and Judge is the first one in a long time. So it's even for Yankee fans, it's interesting to like, no, that's our guy, and now he's gonna go. And it's like, well, I don't know if you've been paying attention for the past decade. That's how this has worked for every other team. So it's just, he is very unique from the Yankee perspective, I think, for that reason.
Yeah, but you'd figure it'd be the same way with a team like the Red Sox
Yeah.
that have perennially been towards the top of Major League Baseball in terms of payroll. To to a somewhat extent, the Braves. I mean, the Braves, their books are open, they're public, and they're certainly not hurting for cash. So I think it's just the way, like you said, baseball sort of trended the last decade. In particular, I mean, even that's the way the Yankees have trended for the last decade. I mean, they've been very, very particular when and who they spend large dollars on. I mean, remember back 2013, I remember being in college when the Yankees refused to match what the Mariners were offering for Robinson Cano,
Yeah.
and they let him walk for whatever Seattle was offering. And you thought that was, another guy, homegrown Yankee, was a huge part of their 2009 World Series championship team, but that's not, that was George Steinbrenner. This is Hal Steinbrenner's Yankees. And you see that sometimes when ownership gets passed on within the family. George didn't care spending all that money because the Yankees were a side business.
Right.
This is Hal's business,
Mm-hmm.
and Hal's looking to make money. And that means, choosing where and when to spend money on players. And if he feels Judge is outside of what they're looking to do from a price range standpoint, then it's going to be Arrivederci.
Yeah, it's one of those, the what is the phrase, the calling the kettle black or whatever that might be, the pot calling the
I
kettle
think
black.
it's
Just
just
they're not used to it as a fan base, but like you said, this happens everywhere else. So right before I give you your last
and
question,
it's not like the writing hasn't been on the wall.
yeah, it's nothing. It's not surprising. If anything, it's because it's so obvious. It's stressing out the fan base or whatever. But before I give you the last question, you actually touched on something, and you're the perfect person to talk about with this because I've kind of felt it too. You mentioned you're almost more of a Reds fan now than the team you grew up watching. I have found myself trying to decide: do I watch the Reds or do I watch my Phillies? I've been a Phillies fan since probably middle school, probably a little later than your average fan. And it helps that the Reds are an extremely likable organization. They might have the most likable player in baseball at first base, so that's something to do with it. But like, how does that affect your fandom? Because I'll be honest, I've been struggling with it a little bit lately.
I mean, it hasn't affected me at all, really. I mean, I think it's just been a natural progression for me. It's hard for me to be attached to something when I'm not watching it
Sure,
and I'm
yeah,
not, committed to it on a daily basis. I very rarely watch, the Yankees play. Maybe if they're still going after a Tortugas game is over, more likely on the road.
hmm,
But the most Major League Baseball I'm watching is whatever's on late night after our game is done.
right,
So it's hard to be attached when you're not watching, and it's also becomes different when you have an interpersonal relationship with some of these guys. I mean, I was heavily invested in that Cubs team in 2016 when they were making the playoff run because I knew a whole bunch of guys in that dugout that were fighting for a ring. And that's the case now with the Reds. So many of those guys that I've worked with either in Greenville or, here in Daytona Beach. So it becomes, an interpersonal thing, watching the Reds and Yankees a couple weeks ago, watching Stuart Fairchild hit his first career
yeah,
home run
on his first
into,
pitch,
into the seats left at Yankee Stadium. That was more exciting to me than anything else
yeah,
may have happened in terms of results in that series. Um, so, once a personal level becomes, a part of it, it becomes a lot easier to dissociate with whomever you rooted for as a kid, because you want to see the people grown to know as a person, as a ball player, as a human. Um, see success at the highest level because that's where you hope to be one day.
It's got to be like a small bit, kind of the way like a ball player would be. Maybe they grew up a White Sox fan, and then you get drafted by the Mariners, and you're not sitting around watching White Sox games anymore. That's not really the team you invest in anymore. It's probably a little bit like that. Last thing
Yeah, I
for
mean,
you here.
the best example of it is that, the thing I joked about with my dad a lot growing up, and I think it's even truer now, is, growing up mostly a Yankee fan. Dad was a Yankee fan, mom was a Met fan, so grew up more of a Yankee fan because it was the height of that dynasty, but had to pull for the Mets, and mom would threaten to kick me out of the house. But if the Red Sox came calling and said, "Hey, we want to make you our play-by-play guy," guess what? You're looking at the biggest Red Sox fan out there. Yeah, grew up, rooting for the Yankees, hating the Red Sox or whatever, but things change when you get older and becomes a little more of a business kind of thing. But like never thought I'd be pulling for the Cubs and Reds and whomever I've been affiliated for in my minor league career. But things change when you start knowing people who are involved, and you want to see them have success too.
When I first interviewed at Stetson, they looked at the resume and they're like, we'd love to have you, hopefully for a long time, but we'd understand if the Gators came calling. And I'm like, well, what you'll learn about me is if the Gators come calling, I hang up the phone because of the banner here behind me. But that's just me being petty. I fully understand your take on it, and that's probably the better take to have, honestly. Did you catch the Captain episode 1, or do you plan to watch that whole thing when it's out, the Derek Jeter documentary? What were your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I definitely want to watch that. I definitely saw episode one. I know episode two, I think, is Thursday night.
Yep.
And I think it's going to be successive Thursdays
Mm.
going forward. So probably gonna have to use the ESPN Plus subscription to catch up after Thursday. But yeah, I definitely plan on watching. There's so many of those 30 for 30s that I love, and I still haven't watched yet. I still need to watch the Once Upon a Time in Queens one from last year
That's a
about the
10-parter
86
too.
Mets.
That's.
Yeah, that's a multiple part one. There's so many good ones, but definitely will be watching the Jeter one. He was one of my guys growing up. The story I like to tell is, my dad told me as a kid, look, I was, starting to become a teenager, 5'8" Jewish kids don't grow up to be Derek Jeter. So that's how I ended up going down the broadcasting path in sports. And it's funny now. It's funny, but yeah, no. So Jeter was a huge part of my baseball fandom growing up. So definitely be watching, and it was cool to see. Obviously know a whole lot of his story. Remember reading his autobiography as a kid growing up. But to see some things and learn some different things that maybe I didn't know about either him or those '90s Yankees teams or whatever. Will be interesting. And even if I wasn't a Yankee or Jeter fan growing up, just as a sports fan, a lot of those docu pieces are just awesome to watch. And there's still a bunch I still need to sit down and motor through.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one that Yankee fan or not, people are going to watch. Much like Man in the Arena, much like the Michael Jordan one and everything.
I will say this. There is, I mentioned the Red Sox fan thing. The one thing I will not be able to sit through, and I don't know, there would have to be a significant lump sum payment. I could not sit through Man in the Arena. I will never be watching, never be watching that. As a guy who grew up a Jet
Sure,
fan,
yeah. You're,
I do not need to watch the worst parts of my sports fandom life on repeat.
my
So no,
understanding
I
is
will not be watching Man in the Arena. That's the 130 for 30 I will not be watching.
each episode, from what I understand, is like each Super Bowl appearance by him. So I'll go back and
Exactly.
watch. I'll go back and watch the one that he loses to the Eagles, but that's probably about it.
Yeah, I was gonna say because even the ones that he lost, like the two to the Giants, like
Yeah.
that's as someone who grew up a Jet fan, that was like worst case scenario.
Oh
It's like,
yeah.
hey, the team you hate the most in one division is facing off against the team you hate the most in the other division. Like,
Yeah.
can the game end in a tie?
That'd be like if
Again, they both forfeit. What happens?
if the Cowboys ever play the Patriots in the Super Bowl, that'll be the one I don't watch. So I totally understand that. The one good piece of information I learned in the episode 1 of the Captain was Jeter went, I believe, sixth in his draft, and the player taken before him was actually a UCF Knight. So that was kind of interesting to me to
Yep.
find out. But yeah, man, just
Yeah,
want
no, and
to just
no, he was expected to go 1 or 5 there to the top team, the Astros, or to the Reds,
mhm.
to the Reds at number 5, and the Reds chose Chad Mottola over him. And I think one of the funny things is the guy who went number 1, Phil Nevin, ended up being a coach for the Yankees for a couple of years. He's now the interim manager of the Angels, but he was the Yankees' third base coach
Oh wow.
for the last couple of years prior to that. So it's funny how those sort of things work out in the long run. But yeah, there's definitely a bunch of teams out there wondering what could have been. But I think one of my favorite parts of the story, and the captain reminded me of it, was the Hal Newhouser story. I think he was working for the Astros at the
Mhm.
time, and he told them to pick Jeter.
Right.
He was the area scout up in that area because he played for the Tigers. I think still lived in Michigan, and told him to take Jeter at number 1. And they took Nevin, and he said, if I can't convince them to take this guy at number 1, then what am I doing? And
Yeah.
he quit and left baseball, never worked again in baseball.
Yeah. I mean,
Hall of Fame pitcher, Hall of Fame pitcher.
yeah.
Scouting told the guy that, and they said, now we're taking this dude. And
I guess you can only take so much if you're not gonna believe you. But yeah, man,
yeah,
I appreciate your time tonight. I look forward to seeing you over the weekend for a quick weekend series here as we get into like the last month or so of our season. So
yeah,
everyone, if you haven't been out to the Jack yet this year and you're in the area, come on by. And if not, check out Justin's calls on Daytona Tortugas website. And thanks, man. I appreciate it. And I'll see you this weekend.
absolutely. My pleasure, Phil. Thanks as always for having me.
Thanks for listening, guys. See you next time.